So I'm going to need you to use some imagination this morning. We're going to begin by taking ourselves back several thousand years to a prophet of God. And this prophet, we'll just imagine, is sitting there one day when he receives a very strange word from the Lord, a very strange instruction, and a very personal one. God says to him, I want you to take an adulterous wife. You can imagine this prophet's confused. I mean, what in the world? Why would God want me to do that? But he's close enough to the Lord that he's faithful, and he does it. Excuse me, guys. Let's see if I can get that in there. So,
that's a bad cable. That's a bad cable.
Let's try this. Hold on. Any better? Yeah. I'm going to try not to blast your eardrums out. I'm sorry. So this prophet does what the Lord commands, and sure enough, have a few kids. In fact, if it was modern day, and the prophet wasn't a prophet, he might take this woman a lorry and say, which of these kids are mine? So the woman does run off with her lovers. And ultimately, where we pick up the story is where the prophet goes, driven by his love for her, to go and buy her back. He pays the price of a slave for her. But he buys her back. And he says, we're going to live together. And what that story encapsulates is God's love for each one of us. The fact that even in our faithlessness, even when we stray, even when we go down a path that we know we shouldn't, the Lord is right there to get us. I was thinking this week on our mission here at TAF, which is to present the love and saving grace of Jesus Christ. I don't know what your experience has been in churches, but I've had the unfortunate experience that in far too many, I haven't found a whole lot of grace. I found a whole lot of rules and guidelines, the law, but grace seems absent. And, guys, that's not the way it should be. We've got this wonderful gift of grace. We should be shouting it from the rooftops. I'm going to give you just a few examples of this grace. So the first one's one you know well. Sure, the story of the prodigal son. I don't need to recap, I don't think, what happened. He wanted his inheritance, wanted to go off and have some fun. Have some fun with some sin. So he did. Then he realizes that that's not all it's cracked up to be. So he goes back to his father, and he's reciting a speech that he's going to give. And just going to ask his father, hey, just make me one of the servants, you know? I'm just ready to come back. But what's interesting about this story is that he doesn't need to make it up to the door and knock. He doesn't even need to make it down the path. Because what we see in the story is that the Lord, the father, but in this case, representing the Lord, is waiting right there. He's watching. And he runs to embrace it. And there's no talk of, well, let's find out about this servant thing. Nothing like that. There's strictly love, strictly repentance, strictly forgiveness. Immediately, the father's ready to throw a banquet. And if you remember the last part of that story, we have the other son who's jealous. I'm going to switch mics here, guys. Alright, there we go. I can hold my do this, that's fine. Okay, so now that your ears hopefully aren't suffering as much from the static, we have this other son. And he's grumbling, saying, hey, I've been here the entire time. I've been doing what I was supposed to do. And here you are throwing this guy a bacon? You know what he did to your money. He came back broke. And sometimes we look with judgment on that son. Right? We say, man, that was bad. But I think too often we don't embrace the grace that the Lord gives each of us, and we're that son, even if we aren't criticizing others. We're sitting there saying, well, I need to get these rules right. I need to do this. I need to be able to present something to the Lord. I need to have a part in earning this. And we forget the Bible's instructions that all our righteousness is like filthy rags. The Lord doesn't need anything from us. He wants to give. We don't need to clean ourselves up first. In fact, it's a hopeless cause if we attempt to do that. We've got to come as we are and come back. We've got to quit looking at God as this judgmental figure. It's this figure that is sitting there with his list of rights and his list of wrongs. He's that doting father that is just waiting for us to come back. In fact, one poet said that God was like a hound chasing him down these back alleyways. As he worked to escape, the Lord was nipping at his heels, ready to give him the freedom and the peace that he was seeking. You know, in church today, unfortunately in churches all across our land, there's a whole lot of religion, but there's not a whole lot of Jesus. And in our efforts to meet these standards that we think we have to meet, to pretty ourselves up, to feel somehow worthy, like we earn something, we become like the Pharisees. Remember the Pharisees in Jesus' time, right? These great religious scholars, these leaders. People looked up to them. I mean, it's easy for us to look back and say, oh, these were some bad dudes. These guys weren't really that great. But that's not the case at all. These were well-respected people. But they had a problem. And that's that they thought that they were earning their way. And that caused them to do a whole lot of other awful things. It not only caused them to miss out on the fact the Messiah was right there, but it caused them to look judgmentally on people. Jesus gives the example of the two men who go in to pray. One who is just awful, right? We can say that. One who is awful, but recognizes this and says, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And then we've got the Pharisee, says, Lord, thanks you so much, I'm not like it. That guy right there. Because our need to earn this does strange things. It causes us to look at each other and compare. Because we need to feel validated somehow. Causes us to look like they did, say, Jesus, why are you dying with all these sinners? What's going on? And if we continue that attitude, it causes us to miss out on something, because if we catch what Jesus' response to that is, I came to save the sinners. I came to be with those who recognize that there's something missing, that they need something. There's a great quote I got from an author I love, Brennan Manning, from the Ragamuffin Gospel. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. He writes, "Something is radically wrong when the local church rejects a person accepted by Jesus. When a harsh, judgmental, and unforgiving sentence is passed on homosexuals. When a divorcee is denied communion. When the child of a prostitute is refused baptism. When an unlaicized priest is forbidden the sacraments. Jesus comes to the ungodly, even on Sunday morning. His coming ends ungodliness and makes us worthy. Otherwise, we are establishing at the heart of Christianity an utterly ungodly and unworthy preoccupation with works." One of my favorite series of verses is the last letter in Revelation to the churches, the Laodicean church. If you want to turn there, you can. It's Revelation chapter 3. I believe it begins in verse 14. But I'm going to summarize, so if you don't want to look it up, that's fine. So what we have there is a church of people that are convinced that they're fine. They're convinced that they've got everything figured out. They say that, look, we're prosperous. Lord's blessed. We're just fine. We don't need anything. And what Jesus says to them is interesting. And to each of us, one could say, "You don't realize that you're wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked." What a change in condition. Because too often, the way we see ourselves, especially when we're looking to other people, is we think we're okay. I think things are working out fine. And we don't realize that we've forgotten about our abundant need for the grace of Jesus. And in this letter, there's another really bad condition. And that's that Jesus says he's knocking and wants to come in, which implies that he's outside. That we haven't fully let Jesus in. That we've said, God, we're going to work on this, we're going to clean up a bit, do some dusting, then we'll open the door and you can come in. We don't want it too messy for you. We know you're comfortable with some mess, but not the full thing. We forget that unlike our friends, unlike our acquaintances at church, like in some cases even our spouses, God knows everything about us. And he doesn't love us anymore, and he doesn't love us any less. He is that Father that is waiting to embrace us. If only we'll recognize that our righteousness is not from anything we can do, but it's through our belief that he can change us, that he can take care of us. You think about one of the great stories of Jesus' love and compassion, and that's when some of the spiritual leaders brought a woman before Jesus caught in the act of adultery. And it's easy to skip past some important things, so I want us to try to imagine this anew. With the early morning hours, this woman has been caught. Most likely a trap has been set intentionally. So it's very possible that one of the men responsible for this is in this crowd that brings her. I highly doubt she's covered up with much of anything at this point. I mean, we can maybe gloss that over, but she's probably standing there before Jesus and all these other people gathered around, pretty much naked, if not completely. And they just throw her down. And they're not mad about this adultery, right? What they're looking to do is to trap Jesus. They're looking to get him. Looking to say, well, what do you think we should do, Jesus? Because if he says, let her go, he's disobeying the law of Moses that says you've got to stone somebody as long as you have the witnesses, and they did. And then if he says, well, yeah, let's stone her, then there's a problem with the Romans, because you couldn't execute the death penalty without their authorization. So they're convinced. This woman's sitting there. Don't even know what is going through her mind. But, probably this is going to be it. Waiting for at least a harsh word or something. And Jesus stoops down. Just begins writing. Continues writing for a few minutes. And feel just the tension in the air. And then he says, "He who is without sin, cast the first stone." One by one, they drop their stones, they file away. There's another long pause. Jesus addresses the woman now. "Where are your accusers?" You can imagine she probably hasn't even been hearing much of what's going on. Everything's there's a lot of stress here. And all of a sudden, probably glances around a bit and realizes nobody's there. And she says, "Well, no one's here." And those sweet, sweet words, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." And we gotten so wrapped up in playing the game of Christianity, putting on the facade, doing all this, that we don't realize that, I'm going to give you a sports analogy here, that while it was 3rd and 10, and we had a long way to go, the Lord said, "No, I took care of it. Look at the scoreboard. We won. Let's go celebrate." And we're claiming, we're like, no, just let me try it. Now let me see if I would have been able to do it myself. He's like, "Come on, we got to go celebrate." And we're just, "No, God, just let me try to run this play. See, I think I can get there." It's tough to admit that we're hopeless without the Lord. But that's what we've got to get to. It's what we've got to do to accept this radical grace and to be able to share that with other people. Because the Lord doesn't want us to keep this to ourselves. We can have all the wonderful evangelistic methods, all these wonderful ideas and programs, but what more powerful testimony is there than somebody sitting down and saying, "Brother, I was near where you were. God loves you, and I know that because He loves me." We've got to demonstrate that love. We've got to bring people to the feet of Jesus. Not in the manner that those spiritual leaders brought the woman, but in the manner of somebody supportive and helping that person to get there. There's nothing greater than knowing you are unconditionally loved. And I could use all sorts of analogies, mother, father, parental thing we can think, spouses, but unfortunately in our sinful world, Satan's done an incredible job of ruining that. There's a woman in a church I attended that I got to know pretty well, and she said every time she heard God mentioned as the Father, it just sent a chill through her spine. Because her father was an abusive alcoholic who threw her out of the house. So I'm here to tell you today that the Lord is not judgmental. He's not looking to keep a record of rights and wrongs. He wants you. And He doesn't need you to clean up. He doesn't need you to go through certain steps. He doesn't need you to complete any checklists. He just needs you to accept what He's already done. And that's that He has paid once and for all the debt of your sin that you've done and that you will do. And when we cling to that grace and say, "Lord, no, I'm not good enough, but I know you love me anyway. To live a powerful life Jesus told a parable, and you may be familiar with this one as well, of the talents. The wealthy landowner was going away, and he gave 3 of his servants money to invest. If you remember, 2 of those invested it and reaped a return. But one of them, well, he just delivered it back to him. And he said, Master, I know you're a harsh man. I know you collect a reward from where you don't work. So I was afraid, and so I just hid your money. But I've got it here for you. Here you go. I don't want you to miss anything, because oftentimes we hear this, and we hear the parable, the talents, and of course, talent in our mind means gifts, things that we can actually do that we're gifted in. But in this case, talent was purely a monetary sum, much like I gave you $10. And there's another interesting thing here we don't want to miss. And that's that the master delivers a message. So you knew this, and yet you didn't even try to take the safe way. You didn't do something with this. And so I would submit to you today that the big lesson from this is that the Lord wants us to take some risks. That the safe way is not what the Lord has in mind. That if you feel compelled to launch some exciting new ministry, feel compelled to talk to that coworker that always seems so glum and sad every time you see him, that's what you're supposed to do. But the return is inherent with how much risk you take. And that too often we live these safe lives because we think, much like that servant who hid the talent, that God's this judgmental individual. That God is just ready to keep the rights and wrongs, and we've got to make sure to keep those things in balance. Because otherwise we're going to be in some trouble. We're going to get God yelling at us. But the Lord's grace negates any fear we should have of that. Jesus' love was enough that he gave up a very, very cushy life, a life none of us can imagine, to come down here and wallow in humanity and the same sufferings for over 30 years, and ultimately to die what most historians I've read say is one of the most brutal deaths you could possibly experience. And he did all that so you could be with him. So let's give up our trying to be good enough, our reliance on works, the security we think that might give us, and embrace the grace of God in our lives. And let's share with others this amazing message of grace that just is so radical, especially in our world today. The Lord has forgiven you, and you've just got to accept. That's it. There's no long process. There's nothing there. The Lord loves you completely and totally. He knows everything about you, everything you've done, everything you're going to do. What he says is, I want you to look me back. I want you to be with me. I don't care about all that. Just come back. We'll make it good. A great time. I've got all this stuff prepared. Just come and enjoy it. So as you go through your Sabbath, would you think about whether you're ready? Whether you're tired of all those burdens that you may feel others have laid on you, maybe you lay it on yourself. Just put all that down. Say, Lord, you've done it all. amazing thing. Once you've gotten it, you can share it with others. You can see their lives transformed as well. Any of that just goes away. The past is the past. The Lord wants it to be a bright future, no matter what you go through. Because I can't sit here and tell you that it's an easy life the entire time. Still in a world of sin. Got Satan active. But the reward is awesome. You can still have that peace even when you're struggling, even when you're going through things. The Lord loves you. And there's no greater love than that. Would you pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we come before you as broken. Something we don't like to admit. We sometimes like to act like we got everything together and everything's good. But Lord, you know us. You know our struggles. You know what we've been through. Lord, I thank you that despite all that, you're here for us. You've got our back. You love us so much. Lord, I just pray for everyone here that they would get that peace and that love just flowing through them. Lord, we got great work to do. But we need your love and power to do it. In Jesus' name.